So good day Constitute, good day classmates. I am Jacine Manait Buhali from GFD1I and from Study Hub number 6. And this is my member, Maylien Del Rosario and Ruth Somblingo. So my assigned topic here is about the theory of Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky. So before we go through that, first I will going to discuss the theory of Sigmund Freud. So as we all know, Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a chemical method for treating psychopathology through dialogue between a patient and psychoanalyst. Sigmund Freud was born to Galician Jews in the Moravian town of Freiburg in the Austrian Empire. Sigmund Freud born on May 6, 1856 in the Pribor-Zecha, and he died on September 23, 1939 in the Hampstead, London, United Kingdom. Freudian theory suggests that as children develop, they progress through a series of psychosexual stages. At each stage, the libido's pleasure-seeking energy is focused on a different part of the body. The 5-stage psychosexual development are the oral. This stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the mouth. Freud believed that personality developed through a series of childhood stages in which the pleasure-seeking energy of the ID becomes focused on certain erogenous areas. An erogenous zone is characterized an area of the body that is particularly sensitive to stimulation. During the 5 psychosexual stages, which are the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages, the erogenous zone associated with each stage serves as a source of pleasure. For the first stage, which is the oral stage, age ranged birth to 1 year. During the oral stage, the infant's primary source of interactions occurs through the mouth. So the rooting and seeking reflex is especially important. The mouth is vital for eating, and the infant derives pleasure from the oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. So for the second stage, which is the anal stage, age range 1 to 3 years. During the anal stage, Freud believed that the primary focus on the libido was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. The major conflict at this stage is toilet training. The child has to learn to control their bodily needs. Developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment and independence. For the next stage, which is the phallic stage, age range 3 to 6 years, Freud suggests that during the phallic stage, the primary focus on the libidos on the genitals. At this stage, children also began to discover the differences between males and females. For the latency stage, 6 to puberty, during this stage, the superego continues to develop while the ideas energies are suppressed. Children develop social skills, values, and relationships with peers and adults outside of the family. So for the last stage, which is the genital stage, puberty to death. The onset of puberty causes the libido to become active once again. During the final stage of psychosexual development, the individual develops a strong sexual interest in the opposite sex. This stage begins during puberty but lasts throughout the rest of a person's life. So people ask, how does personality develop? According to the famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, children go through a series of psychosexual stages that lead to the development of the adult personality. His theory describes how personality develops over the course of a childhood. One of the most important thing to note is that contemporary psychoanalytic theories of personality development have incorporated and emphasized ideas about interrealized relationships and interactions and the complex ways in when we maintain our sense of selves into the models. That begins with Freud. Some of the example of psychoanalysis include a 20 years old, well-built and healthy, has a seemingly irrational fear of mice. The fear makes him tremble at the sight of a famous or rat. He often finds himself in embarrassing situation because of the fear. For example, if you experience rejection as a child, you might bury those negative feelings in your unconscious so you don't have to deal with them. The memories from the first 2 years of our life. Through this, with adult, Freud created the stages of psychosexual development. Jean William Fritz Piaget was a Switzerland psychologist known for his work on child development. Piaget's theory of cognitive development and epistemological views are together called genetic epistemology. Piaget placed great importance on the education of children. Piaget was born on August 9, 1896 in Neuchâtel, Switzerland, and he died on September 16, 1980 in Geneva, Switzerland. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development, which are the sensory motor, birth to 2 years, pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7 years, concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11 years, formal stage, ages 12 and up. So, how Piaget developed the theory? Piaget was born in Switzerland in the late of 1080s and was a precocious student, publishing his first scientific paper when he was just 11 years old. His early exposure to the intellectual development of children came when he worked as an assistant to Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon as they worked to standardize their famous IQ test. Based on his observation, he concluded that children were not less intellectual than adults. They simply think differently. Albert Einstein called Piaget's discovery like this: so simple only a genius could have thought of it. Jean Piaget developed the 4 stages. First is the sensory motor stage, ages 2 to 2 years. Piaget believed that developing object permanence or object constancy, the understanding that objects continue to exist even when they cannot be seen, was an important element at this point of development. So second stage, which is the pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7 years, children become much more skilled at pretend play during this stage of development, yet continue to think very concretely about the world around them. So for the third stage, which is the concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11 years, while thinking becomes much more logical during the concrete operational stage, it can also be very rigid. Kids at this point in development tend to struggle with abstract and hypothetical concepts. The last stage, which is the formal operational stage, ages 12 and up. The ability to thinking about abstracts and situations is the key hallmark of the formal operational stage of cognitive development. So Jean Piaget believed that children take an active role in the learning process, acting much like a little scientist as they perform experiments, make observations, and learn about the world. Erik Erikson was an ego psychologist who developed one of the most influential theories of development. While his theory was impacted by psychologist Sigmund Freud, work Erikson's theory centered on psychosexual development rather than psychosexual development. So Erik Erikson developed the 8 stages of development. So first is the trust versus mistrust. This stage begins at birth and lasts until your child is around 13 months old. According to Erik Erikson, it is the most important period of our life. So for the second stage, which is the autonomy versus shame and doubt. This stage occurs between the ages of 18 months and around 2 or 3 years. According to Erik Erikson, children at this stage are focused on developing a greater sense of self-control. So for the third stage, which is the initiative versus guilt. This stage occurs during the preschool years between the ages of 3 and 5. During the initiative versus guilt stage, children begin to assert their power and control over the world. For the fourth stage, which is the industry versus inferiority, this stage happens after the third stage of initiative versus guilt. The stage occurs during childhood between the ages of approximately 6 and 11. For the fifth stage, which is the identity versus confusion, this stage occurs during adolescent between the ages of 12 and 18. During this stage, adolescents explore their independence and develop a sense of self. For the sixth stage, which is intimacy versus isolation, this stage, Erik Erikson's theory of psychosexual development, which happens after the fifth stage of identity versus role of confusion. This stage takes place during young adulthood between the ages of 19 and 40. The seventh stage, which is the generativity versus stagnation. In the stage of Erik Erikson's theory of psychosexual development, this stage takes place during middle adulthood between the ages of 40 and 65. So integrity versus despair is the 8 stages and the final stage of Erik Erikson's theory. This stage, theory of psychosexual development, this stage begins at 65 and ends at death. So Erik Erikson was a Danish German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst known for his theory on psychological development on human beings. He may be the most famous for coining the phrase identity crisis. Erik Erikson, born on June 15, 1902 in Frankfurt, Germany. He died on May 12, 1994 on Rosewood Manor, Harwich.
Good afternoon, Coach Jude. Good afternoon, my fellow classmates. I am Miss Melinda Rosario from BTPT GFD1, also from Study Hub number 6, and now I'm going to give some information about the 3 learning principle, which is the first is the ecological theory by Bronfenbrenner, and the classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, and the third is the operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner. Let's start from the ecology theory by Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner was born in Moscow on April 29, 1917. In 1938, Bronfenbrenner received a bachelor in psychology and music from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York City. In 1940, he earned a master in education from Harvard. In 1942, doctorate in developmental psychology from the University of Michigan, and then moved to Cornell University in 1948 as an assistant professor in the Department of Human Development. On September 25, 2005, he died at his home in Ithaca, New York City at the age of 88 due to complication with diabetes. Bronfenbrenner ecological system theory is one of the most accepted explanations regarding the influence of social environment of human development. This theory argues that the environment you grow up in affects every fact of your life. Social factor determine your way of thinking, the emotion you feel, and your like and dislike. When you change your environment, you'll change. If you move to another country with a different culture, your identify will certain change. The same happen if your social role within one of the system changes. Because the five systems are interrelated, the influence of one system on a child's development depends on its relationship with the others. Bronfenbrenner organized them in order of how much of impact they have on a child. Bronfenbrenner theory defines complex layers of environment, each having an effects of a child development. The interaction between factors in a child's maturity, biology, his immediate family, community, environment, and the societal landscape fuels and steers his development. Here is the five system of Bronfenbrenner ecological system theory. The microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, the microsystem, the chronosystem. Microsystem is made up of the groups that have direct contact with the child. Family and school are some of the most important ones. Although there can be many other groups, the relationship between this system and a child's development is obvious. However, the influence both can be both ways. Mesosystem is made up of the relationship between the groups from the first system. The parents-teacher relationship, for example, has a direct impact of the child. Exosystem is also involves factor that affects a child's lives. However, the elements of the system don't have a direct relationship with them. The microsystem influence development because it's determine how the other system can express themselves. Again, this is the case of indirect influence. It affects development because it's change the groups that directly affects the child. Chronosystem refers to the stage of the life that the person is in regarding the situation they're going through. Example of Bronfenbrenner. According to the Bronfenbrenner ecological theory, if a child's parents are actively involved in the friendship of their child, for example, they invite their child friends over to their house from time to time and spend time with them, the child's development is effectively positively through harmony and life.
And now let's proceed to the classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov is full Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, born September 26, 1849, Rasayan, Russia in 1870. He abandoned his theological studies to enter the University of St. Petersburg, where he studies chemistry and sociology. Classical conditioning was first studied in details by Ivan Pavlov, who conducted experiments with dogs and published his findings in 1897, died February 27, 1936, Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. Classical conditioning is a type of learning that had a major influence of the school of thought in psychology known as behaviorism. Discovered by Russian psychology Ivan Pavlov, classical conditioning is a learning process that occurs through association between an environment, stimulus, and naturally occurring stimulus. Classical conditioning, also known as a Pavlovian or respondent conditioning, is a learning through association and was discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simple terms, two stimulus are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animals. Classical conditioning involves forming of association between two stimulus, resulting in a learned response. And also there are three basic phases of this process. Phase 1. Before conditioning, the first part of the classical conditioning process requires a natural occurring stimulus that will automatically elicit a response. Salivating in a response to the smell of food is a good example of a naturally occurring stimulus. During the phase of the process, the unconditioned stimulus UCS result in unconditioned response UCR4. For example, presenting food, the UCS naturally and automatically triggers a salivation response, the UCR. Phase 2. During the conditioning, during the second phase of classical conditioning process, the previously neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with the unconditioned stimulus. As a result of this pairing, an association between the previously neutral stimulus and the UCS is formed. At these points, the once neutral stimulus become known as the conditioned stimulus CS. The subject has now been conditioned to the response to the stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is a previously neutral stimulus that, after becoming association with unconditioned stimulus, eventually comes to a trigger conditioned response. Example, if you hear a Pavlov dogs, that's the experiments conducted by Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov, wherein his dog started to salivate when he rang a bell. This is the best known example of classical conditioning when a neutral stimulus is paired with a conditioned response. Operant conditioning by V.F. Skinner. Burrhus Frederick Skinner was an American psychologist, behaviorist, author, inventor, and social philosopher. Burrhus Frederick Skinner was born on March 20, 1904. In Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, U.S. on August 18, 1990, Skinner was diagnosed with leukemia and died in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Operant conditioning, sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning, is a method of learning that employs reward and punishment for behaviors. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence, whether negative or positive, for that behavior. The theory of B.F. Skinner is based upon the idea that learning is a function of changes in overt behavior. Changes in behavior are the result of an individual's response to event stimuli that occur in the environment. Reinforcement is the key element in Skinner's SR theory. The components of operant conditioning are reinforcement and punishment. There is a positive and negative reinforcement as well as positive and negative punishment. Reinforcement is an operant conditioning. Reinforcement is an event that strengthens and increases the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of reinforcers. In both of these cases of reinforcement, the behavior increases. The positive reinforcers are favorable events or outcomes that are presented after the behavior. The negative reinforcers involve the removal of an unfavorable events or outcomes after the display of a behavior. Punishment in operant conditioning. Punishment is the presentation of an adverse event or outcomes that causes a decrease in the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of punishment. In both of these cases, the behavior decrease. The positive punishment, sometimes referred to as a punish by application, present an unfavorable events or outcomes in order to weaken the response it follows. The negative punishment, also known as a punishment by removal, occurs when a favorable event or outcome is removed after the behavior occurs. Operant behavior is done because it produces some type of consequence. For example, you are probably familiar with Pavlov dog's classical conditioning, in which the dog salivates in response to a meat powder. The dog could control the salivation. That's classical conditioning.
Good day everyone, my name is Ruth Isamblingo and now I'm going to discuss the remaining theory, which are the multiple intelligence by Howard Gardner and metacognitive theory by John Flavel, and the last one is laws of learning by Edward Thorndike. Howard Howard Gardner was born on July 11, 1943, in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Gardner graduated from Harvard College in 1965. In 1966, Howard Gardner finished his studies in London School of Economics. In 1986, Gardner became a professor at Howard Graduate School of Education.
According to Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, humans have several different ways of processing information, and these ways are relatively independent of one another. This theory suggests that traditional psychometric views of intelligence are too limited.
This theory is helping students to identify and develop their own strength, to help them learn easily, and also for the teacher to discover more effective teaching methods to define intelligence and allow their students' strength to help them learn. Learning more about the multiple intelligences can help you better understand your own strengths. If you don't know yet which type describes you best, just continue watching this video. First, we have visual spatial intelligence. Visual spatial intelligence people are good at visualizing things. These individuals are often good with directions as well as maps, charts, videos, and pictures. They learn more easily when presented with visual rather than auditory information. Like for example, by doing a puzzle, they can easily solve it because they use their spatial awareness and hands-eye coordination, which they are good at. The next one is linguistic verbal intelligence. Linguistic verbal intelligence people are able to use words well both when writing and speaking. These individuals are typically very good at writing stories, memorizing information, and reading. Like for example, these people can remember information when it's written or spoken form. They also enjoy debates and giving speeches. Next is logical mathematical intelligence. Logical mathematical intelligence people are good at reasoning, recognizing patterns, and logically analyzing problems. These individuals tend to think conceptually about numbers, relationships, and patterns. Like for example, they like to spend time creating computer-assisted designs, building electronic devices, using computer applications, or programming computers. Next is bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence people are said to be good at body movement, performing actions, and physical control. People who are strong in this area tend to have excellent hand-eye coordination and dexterity. Like for example, they love to create arts and craft because touching and manipulating objects is their preferred way of learning. Next is musical intelligence. Musical intelligence people are good at thinking patterns, rhythm, and sounds. They have a strong appreciation for music, are often good at musical composition and performance. Like for example, teachers may ask their students to play music from a historic period or ethnic group or to describe the feeling of a poem. It can enhance their learning this way. Next is interpersonal intelligence. Interpersonal intelligence people are good at understanding and interacting with other people. These individuals are skilled at assessing the emotions, motivations, desires, and intentions of those around them. Like for example, a student that can lead and monitor very well in the group. Next is intrapersonal intelligence. Interpersonal intelligence people are good at being aware of their own emotional states, feelings, and motivations. They tend to enjoy self-reflection and analysis, including daydreaming, exploring relationships with others, and assessing their personal strengths. Like for example, student that has the ability to learn by their own and they are working their activities independently. Next is naturalistic intelligence. Naturalistic intelligence people are more in tune with nature and are often interested in nurturing, exploring the environment, and learning about other species. These individuals are said to be highly aware of even subtle changes to their environments. Like for example, students that loves participating camping activities in school. John Flavel. John Flavel is an American developmental psychologist specializing in children's cognitive development. He was born on August 9, 1928 in Rockland, Massachusetts. John Flavel argues that learning is maximized when students learn to think about their thinking and consciously employ strategies to maximize their reasoning and problem-solving capabilities. A metacognitive thinker knows when and how they learn best and employs strategies to overcome barriers to learning. Metacognition is the knowledge you have of your own cognition process. It is your ability to control your thinking process through various strategies such as organizing, monitoring, and adapting. So metacognition is defined in simplest term as thinking about your own thinking. The root word is meta, means beyond. So the term refers to beyond thinking. Especially, this means that it encompasses the process of planning, tracking, and assessing your own understanding or performance. Flavel identified what he believed to be two elements of metacognition: knowledge of cognition and regulation of cognition. Metacognitive knowledge. Metacognitive knowledge involves learning process in your beliefs about how you learn and how you think others learn, the task of learning and how you process information, and the strategies you develop and when you will use them. There are three types of metacognitive knowledge. First, we have declarative knowledge. Person knowledge or understanding one's own capabilities. This type of metacognitive knowledge is not always accurate as an individual's self-assessment can easily be unreliable. Next is procedural knowledge. Task knowledge including content, what do I need to know, and length, how much space do I have to communicate what I know. Task knowledge is related to how difficult an individual perceives the task to be as well as to their self-confidence. Next is strategy knowledge. Conditional knowledge or one's ability to use strategies to learn information as well as for adapting these strategies to new situations. This is related to the age of developmental stage of the individual. Like for example, a kindergartner can be taught strategies but needs to be reminded to use them, such as sounding out words when learning to read. In contrast, an upper elementary student understands this strategy and knows when it will be effective under different circumstances. Metacognitive regulation is used to describe how individuals monitor and assess their knowledge. This includes knowing how and when to use certain skills and helps individuals to control their learning. An example of this would be a student reflecting on his or her own work, a task that is often assigned while in school. Later on, individuals assess themselves by asking, how am I doing? How could I do this more efficiently or accurately next time? Next is metacognitive experiences. Metacognitive experiences are the experience of an individual has through which knowledge is attained or through which regulation occurs. Like for example, declarative knowledge of one's own abilities could be attained by receiving a series of A+ in spelling tests in a row. This would give the individual the knowledge that they have high achieving capabilities in that spelling area. Next is meta-memory memory. Meta-memory is knowledge of what memory is, how it works, and how to remember things. These skills develop over time and improve more readily with instruction. An example of this would be students utilizing a mnemonic device or acronym to learn and easily recall information to prepare for a test. And now let's proceed to the last theory. Edward Lee Thorndike was an American eugenicist, psychologist, and white supremacist who spent nearly his entire career at Teachers College, Columbia University. Edward Thorndike was born on August 31, 1874 in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, United States. Thorndike graduated from the Roxbury Latin School on 1891. On August 9, 1949, Edward Lee Thorndike died at the age of 74 in Montrose, New York, United States. Edward Thorndike developed the first 3 laws of learning, which are readiness, exercise, and effect. He set also the law of effect, which means that any behavior that is followed by pleasant consequences is likely to be repeated, and any behavior followed by unpleasant consequences is likely to be avoided. This law shows that if the connection of relation can be modified like relation between stimulus and response, and that relation can be followed by expected event in order to make the relation much stronger. In contrast, if the unexpected event happen, the relation can be weak. Readiness. The law of readiness is also known as the law of preparedness. According to this law, the learner learns when he is prepared to learn. Like for example, a student learns best when they are physically or mentally ready to learn, and they do not learn well if they see no reason for learning. Effect. According to this law, if the effort is doing any work is pleasant or enjoyable, the individual tries to learn that activity rapidly and learn it too. Like for example, if the result of the response is positive, the behavior is likely to be repeated again. The last one is exercise. According to this law, when an adjustable connection is made frequently between a stimulus and a response, the strength of the connection is increased. But when the adjustable connection is not made between a situation and a response over a length of time, the strength of that connection is decreased. Like for example, the teacher should provide different opportunities for learners to practice or repeat the task, such as recall, manual drill, or review. So that's all the 10 learning principle. I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching.